Hello and welcome to the Pastor's Study. I've titled this series of videos the Pastor's Study because I want to separate it from our catechism videos, our Q&A videos, and a number of other things. So this particular one will be about books and materials that help with our discipleship at the individual level, in the home, and in the congregation. And as you know, we have been reading books every year as a congregation. And this year we're going to be doing that. We're going to be reading together 3 books. The books that we're reading actually is going to be a single book, which we will supplement with 2 others. And that book is called The Benedict Option, written by Rod Dreher. It offers a strategy, as it says, for Christians in a post-Christian nation. So this is going to be the primary book that we're going to talk about. We're going to go through that book in pretty clear detail. Now, we're going to supplement that with 2 other books. One of those is Strangers in a Strange Land by the Archbishop of Philadelphia, who is writing similar things from a Catholic perspective. And then we're going to also look at a book. I'm checking my notes here. We'll be looking at a book called Out of the Ashes, Rebuilding America's Culture. Now, each of these books in their own way talk about in their own perspective. So they're not exactly on the same page, but they're close. A shift in American culture, that originally was Christian friendly or Christian based. There's a lot of debate as to whether America was founded as a Christian nation or just that the Judeo-Christian structures were part of it and therefore it was Christian friendly. I don't want to get into that argument, but whatever it was, it's not the same now. And it's moved to what can be called a Christian hostile or a Christian harmful culture. Now, by Christian hostile is meant that there are aspects of our culture that are beginning to turn against the Judeo-Christian foundations or influence. And therefore, that hostility is pushing the culture, the Christians, to the margin of the culture. The other is that it's a Christian harmful culture, and that means that as Christians become more and more like where the culture is going, more and more assimilated, they lose their Christian identity and their Christian distinctions. And that may be the greater issue. It's not so much at this point that we're being persecuted, but that if we join ourselves too fully in where the culture is going, it becomes harmful to our Christian development and formation, and it affects then our children and our grandchildren. So this shift from what the culture was and to what it is now is generally seen as taking place in the last century, particularly the last half of the last century, that period of the 50s and 60s and 70s, that transition to a postmodern era, if you will, or the emergence of that, and the idea of a post-Christian America, which will have to be defined. We'll talk about that as well, giving us this sense that we have to do church, we have to be church in some ways different than we have been in the past. Now, the background of the Benedict Option, the primary book that we're looking at, and the Stranger's book itself, is what we would call traditional Christianity. Now, that tradition comes out of the Orthodox Christian tradition, the Roman Catholic Christian tradition, the Protestants tradition, and to some extent, the free church where they have a denominational or traditional sense. So Baptists, Mennonites, Methodists, those kinds of groups. We're not talking at this point about non-denominationals. That's part of the post-Christian and postmodern world that we'll talk about as we get there. Out of the Ashes, on the other hand, is a critique of the American culture And while the Benedict option and the Strangers in a Strange Land take a diaspora view, an idea that we have to live as the church in a land that is not Christian based or friendly, Out of the Ashes tries to make an argument for rebuilding the American culture back in more of an accommodation to those Judeo-Christian frameworks. So it's somewhat of a different perspective. The guy is a little more blunt in his criticism of American culture. And for some people, that will be refreshing, and for some people, that will be a little over the edge. But I think that we need the perspective of the three books to have our conversation. So the discussion now is between whether we care about our faith and our survival as a community of faith, or are we also concerned about the survival of the inherent Christian nature of our culture? And those are two different questions, and we'll talk about those as well. Now, what I want to do, I've told you I wanted you to read the introduction to the Benedict option, and I want to read a quote here in why this book was written. I want to say something about that. Then we'll look a little bit at where we're going, and then I'll be done with this first section. The author says, I have written the Benedict option to wake up the church and to encourage it to act to strengthen itself while there is still time. If we want to survive, we want to return to the roots. We have to return to the roots of our faith, both in thought and in practice. We are going to have to learn habits of the heart forgotten by believers in the West. We're going to have to change our lives and our approach to life in radical ways. In short, we're going to have to be the church without compromise, no matter what it costs. Now, it's interesting that these books are being written now when many of us in the Disciple Center have been engaged in this very process for 15 years in the history of the Disciple Center, and for some of us who came out of First Baptist Westminster for close to 30 years. This is not new to us. We know that we have to rethink our individual faith. We know that we have to rethink the Christian home and marriage. And we know that we have to rethink the congregation. And to some extent, the Disciple Center took the Benedict option as its foundation. It is both heartening and concerning that others in the church are also waking up. It's heartening in that often we've been seen as a cult or something very bizarre, not something that mainstream Christians should be thinking about. It's disheartening in that they have awakened so late in the process. We have lost a lot of Christians into the assimilation of postmodernity, and the generation growing up, for the most part, is very ignorant of the scriptures and the traditions of Christianity that hold our identity and our community together. So I think that this will be a reinforcement for us more than a aha to us, but it will also help us to explain to others, and we will find that many of our family members and other believers in other congregations are beginning to wake up to this situation and will now be able to engage us as a benefit rather than a threat. And I think that's useful. So I want to now read one more passage from the introduction. This is written on page 4 of his introduction called The Awakening. He says, in the first part of the book, I will define the challenges of post-Christian America as I see it. I will explore the philosophical and theological roots of our society's fragmentation, and I will explain how the Christian virtues embodied in the 6th century rule of Saint Benedict, a monastic guide that played a powerful role in preserving Christian culture throughout the so-called Dark Ages, can help all believers today. Now, this is important because we read the Rule of St. Benedict several years ago, and when I was forming the concept of the diaspora model using both Jewish and Christian sources, one of the Christian sources I used was the Rule of St. Benedict. It's a fairly small book. You can read it fairly easy. It's available in a number of ways. You can even get it free on the internet. I think from 1minute monk.com, but there are many sources where you can get it. If you didn't get it before, get it, read it. We'll need that for the second section of the book. He says, in the second part, I discuss how the way of Christian living prescribed by the rule can be adapted to the lives of modern conservative Christians in all churches and confessions. To avoid political confusion, I use the word Orthodox, small o, to refer to traditional Protestants, Catholics, Eastern Orthodox Christians. The rule offers insights in how to approach politics, faith, family, community, education, and work. And I will detail how they manifest themselves in the lives of a diverse number of Christians, people like us who are already doing this, who have lessons to teach the entire church. Finally, he says, I will consider the critical importance of believers thinking and acting radically in the face of two most powerful phenomena directing contemporary life, pulverizing the church's foundations: sex and technology. So those he is going to focus on. I'm going to supplement that with other things that I think are going on, such as extended adolescence and a number of other issues that have affected us. But we're going to use this book for the basis of our discussion. We will supplement it with these two books. And of course, foundational to everything we do will be the Holy Scriptures. We are not looking for something external to this, but something that understands this. And then, of course, it will help for you to have the Rule of St. Benedict as well. So I'm hoping that you have read that first chapter, that maybe you've read even further. Each week, I'm going to try to do a video that gives a little bit of discussion. And what I'm hoping you'll do is I'm putting this on Facebook, so I'm hoping that you will make comments below, and people will respond to your comments, and we'll kind of have a discussion in that sense. We'll also have discussion at the congregation. I hope you'll have discussion in your homes for Shabbat or when you gather for Bible studies with the congregation, and that this will become part of our conversation over the next several months. So until then, I thank you for paying attention, and I'll see you at service, and I'll see you in our conversations.